The phone screen goes black. For a moment, the room looks harmless. A small lamp glows beside the bed. Rain taps softly against the window. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hums with that low, steady sound you never notice until everything else disappears. No voices, no videos, no messages, no music filling the corners of the mind. The person sits there expecting peace, but peace does not come first. Something else enters, a thought rises. Then another, then one more, sharper than the first. A mistake from years ago, a face they have not seen in a long time, a sentence they wish they had never said, a fear about tomorrow, a strange tightness in the chest. The room is quiet, but the mind is not. The silence does not feel empty. It feels crowded. This is the part nobody tells us when they speak about silence, as if it is always gentle, healing, and calm. Sometimes silence feels like opening a door and finding someone already waiting on the other side. Sometimes the moment the noise stops, the past steps forward. The things we avoided all day begin to move again. The mind, no longer covered by sound, becomes almost too visible. And that is why silence can hurt, not because silence attacks us, because it removes the walls we built out of noise. During the day, life gives us many ways to escape ourselves. A phone in the hand, a screen glowing across the room, news moving too fast to understand, music in the car, podcasts while cooking, messages arriving before one thought has time to finish. Even boredom has become hard to find because the moment space appears, something comes to fill it. A quiet elevator ride becomes a quick check of the phone. A walk down the street becomes background audio. A night alone becomes a glowing screen inches from the face. Modern life has learned how to protect us from silence, and at first, that sounds like comfort. Yet, hidden inside that comfort is a strange question. If silence is so peaceful, why do so many people reach for noise? The moment silence appears, maybe the problem is not silence itself. Maybe the problem is what silence reveals. Imagine a city at night from high above. Streets shine with headlights. Windows glow in every building. Air conditioners hum. Sirens fade in the distance. Even when the city sleeps, it never fully stops. That is how the modern mind often lives. Always lit, always moving, always carrying something from one place to another. Then, suddenly, the power goes out. In that darkness, the city has not disappeared. It has only lost the noise that made it feel normal. Shapes become clearer. The sky becomes visible. Sounds that were always there begin to rise from underneath. Silence can do the same thing inside a person. It does not create every fear, every memory, or every restless thought. It simply takes away the distractions that kept them hidden. That is why a quiet room can feel more intense than a crowded street. In the street, attention is pulled outward. In silence, attention begins to turn around. And when attention turns around, many people discover they have been living beside an inner storm. This is where the mystery begins. Why does the mind become louder when the world becomes quiet? A person may sit down to rest, but instead of rest, the mind starts working. It replays conversations. It imagines problems. It worries about money, health, family, time, age, failure, meaning. It drifts backward into regret. and forward into fear. One moment, the body is sitting in a chair. The next, the mind is years away. Nothing in the room has changed. The lamp is still there. The rain is still touching the glass. The floor is still beneath the feet. Yet inside, an entire world has begun to move. This is why silence can feel threatening. It gives the mind no easy place to run. For some people, quiet is soft. It feels like a lake at dawn, wide and still, with mist floating over the surface. They sit in it and feel space returning to their lives. But for others, quiet feels like being locked in a room with every unfinished emotion they have tried not to touch. The difference is not always strength or weakness. Often, it is training. A mind trained by constant stimulation begins to treat emptiness as danger. A mind that has learned to pause may experience the same silence as refuge. The room is the same. The quiet is the same. What changes is the relationship with what appears inside it. Ancient Buddhist and Zen traditions noticed this long before brain scans, smartphones, or modern psychology. They did not enter silence because life was simple. They entered silence because the human mind was not simple. Even in a world without notifications, people still suffered from craving, fear, envy, grief, anger, and the endless search for something that would finally make the self feel complete. A monk sitting in a meditation hall was not escaping life. He was meeting it at the root. There is a common mistake people make when they imagine meditation or spiritual silence. They picture a person becoming blank, peaceful, untouched by thought, almost like a stone statue with no human struggle left inside. But real silence is not always like that. At the beginning, it can be messy, honest, uncomfortable. It may show the person how much desire is moving through them, how much fear is hiding beneath their plans, how much of their life is built around not feeling certain things. That is not failure. It may be the first real seeing. A person closes their eyes and expects a calm mind, but what appears is impatience. They try to breathe, but the body feels restless. They want peace, but the mind keeps asking for something else. A different life, a better past, a safer future, a version of themselves who has already solved everything. Silence does not flatter us. It shows us the mind as it is. This can be disturbing, because much of daily life depends on not noticing too much. We move quickly from task to task, not only because we are busy, but because movement can hide discomfort. A full schedule can become armor. Noise can become a blanket. Even entertainment, which may be harmless in small doses, can become a way of never sitting alone with the ache beneath the surface. There is a reason the phrase, "left alone with your thoughts," does not always sound peaceful. For many people, it sounds like a threat. Yet, something important must be said clearly. The terrifying truth about silence is not supernatural. There is no hidden monster in a quiet room, no dark force waiting inside stillness. What waits there is more intimate than that. The mind itself, its memories, its hunger, its old wounds, its hopes, its unfinished grief, its need to be seen, praised, safe, forgiven, loved, and certain. When the outside world goes quiet, these inner movements may become easier to notice. And because we often do not know how to meet them, we call the silence painful. But perhaps silence is not the pain. perhaps silence is the mirror. A mirror does not create the tiredness in the face. It does not invent the wound. It does not cause the tears. It only reflects what is already there without argument. In the same way, silence may reveal the mind's hidden activity with a kind of honesty that feels almost cruel at first. Still, there is mercy in that honesty, because what cannot be seen cannot be understood. A person can spend years trying to fix their life from the outside while never noticing the engine of restlessness inside. They can change cities, jobs, partners, routines, screens, diets, and opinions, yet still carry the same unease from one place to another. Silence interrupts that pattern. It asks a question most people avoid. What is still moving in you when nothing else is moving? That question can feel frightening because it cannot be answered by distraction. It cannot be scrolled away. It cannot be solved by adding more sound. It brings the person back to the raw experience of being alive. Without decoration, there is breath, there is the body, there is the mind. There is the strange fact that even in a quiet room, the self keeps speaking. Buddhist teachings often point toward this restless movement, not to shame the person, but to help them see the source of suffering more clearly. The mind reaches, it resists, it clings to what changes, and pushes away what it fears. It creates stories about who we are, what we lack, what we must become, and what must happen before we can finally rest. Silence reveals this because silence removes the usual escape routes. No applause, no argument, no performance, no audience. Only the quiet pressure of being here. That is why the first encounter with silence can feel less like relaxation and more like exposure. The person sitting in the dim room may begin to understand that the noise outside was never the only noise in their life. There was another noise underneath it, one they carried everywhere, the endless commentary of the mind. At first, this discovery can feel disappointing. We expected stillness to be beautiful. We expected silence to feel like soft light through bamboo, like a temple courtyard before dawn, like a candle flame that does not shake. Sometimes it does become that. But often, before silence becomes peaceful, it becomes truthful. And truth is not always comfortable when it first arrives. The room remains quiet. The phone stays dark. Rain moves softly along the window. In that small pocket of stillness, the person begins to see something they could not see while running. The mind is not simply disturbed by silence. The mind may be afraid of empty space, because empty space gives it nothing to grab, no task to complete, no role to play, no noise to hide behind, only awareness watching. And somewhere inside that watching, the next question begins to form. If silence does not create the storm, but reveals it, then what is the mind doing when everything outside has finally stopped? Why does it hate empty space so much? The room has gone quiet, but something inside refuses to be still. At first, the person thinks the problem is the silence itself. The walls feel too close, the air feels too open. The small sounds in the room become strangely loud. A pipe shifts in the building. Rain touches the glass. Breath moves in and out, and even that begins to feel like something being watched. Then the real noise appears, not from outside, from the mind. A quiet minute becomes a doorway. Behind it, Thoughts begin to move without asking permission. One thought reaches backward into the past. Another jumps forward into tomorrow. A small worry becomes a whole imagined scene. A memory becomes a judgment. A judgment becomes a story about the self. The body is sitting still, but the mind has already left the room. This is one of the reasons silence can feel so strange. We often believe the mind becomes active because the world is active. Traffic, messages, work, people, pressure, screens, money, schedules, noise. It seems obvious that the mind is restless because life is restless. Yet when the outside world finally becomes quiet, the mind often keeps moving. Sometimes it moves even more. Modern neuroscience has a name for one part of this movement. Researchers often speak about the brain's default mode network, a group of connected brain regions that tends to become active when a person is not focused on a clear outside task. In simple words, when you are not solving a problem, reading a sentence, driving carefully, or listening closely to someone, the mind often starts to wander through its own inner world. It remembers, it imagines, it compares, it rehearses, it wonders who you are, what others think of you, what went wrong before, and what might go wrong next. The phrase sounds technical, but the experience is familiar. You sit down for a moment and suddenly remember something embarrassing from years ago. You take a shower and begin planning a conversation that has not happened. You lie in bed, and the mind opens a theater of possible futures, most of them unfinished, many of them unpleasant. Nobody pressed play. The film began by itself. This does not mean the mind is broken. Mind wandering can be useful. It can help a person plan, imagine, learn from the past, and understand other people. A life without memory or imagination would not be human in the way we know it. The problem begins when the wandering mind becomes a room we cannot leave. Silence makes that room easier to hear. During a busy day, attention is pulled outward again and again. A message arrives. A person speaks. A task demands action. A screen flashes with color and movement. The mind may still be restless, but the restlessness is covered by activity. It hides inside the noise, like a fish moving under dark water. In silence, the water clears. Suddenly, the movement is visible. This is why empty space can feel uncomfortable. The mind is used to being fed. It wants something to chew. A sound, a face, a task, a problem, a goal, a small reward, a reason to move. When none of these appear, the mind often begins feeding on itself. It turns memory into material. It turns fear into fuel. It turns the self into a question that never quite settles. A person may enter silence hoping to relax, but the mind may begin searching for unfinished business. It looks for danger. It looks for identity. It looks for proof that everything is okay. If it cannot find proof, it may create a problem simply to have something to hold. That is the strange hunger of the mind. It would rather hold pain than hold nothing. Buddhist teachings saw this restlessness with great care. They did not describe it with brain scans or modern lab language, but they studied it through direct experience. Sit quietly, watch the mind, and soon you begin to see its habits. It chases what feels pleasant. It pushes away what feels unpleasant. It clings to praise, comfort, memory, desire, opinion, and identity. Then, When those things change, suffering appears. One Buddhist word often used here is dukkha, pronounced dukkha. It is sometimes translated as suffering, but that English word can sound too narrow. Dukkha can also mean unease, dissatisfaction, stress, or the deep feeling that life never stays exactly the way the mind wants it to stay. It is the ache of wanting the changing world to become finally secure. A pleasant feeling comes, and the mind says, "Keep this." An unpleasant feeling comes, and the mind says, "Remove this." A quiet moment comes, and the mind says, "Give me something else." This is not only a religious idea. It is something anyone can observe. Notice how quickly a good moment turns into the fear of losing it. Notice how praise can create hunger for more praise. Notice how a small insult can replay in the mind long after the sound of the words is gone. The event ends. The mind continues. Silence reveals this continuation. Without new noise, old noise returns. Without a task, the mind creates one. Without an outside enemy, it may begin arguing with memory. This is why a quiet room can become more dramatic than a crowded place. The crowd gives the mind objects. Silence gives the mind itself. And the mind often does not know what to do with itself. In daily life, most people are not only seeking happiness, they are also seeking escape from inner discomfort. This escape does not always look unhealthy. It may look normal. A full calendar, a busy home, constant information, small talk, background music. Another episode, another scroll, another check of the inbox, even when nothing important is expected. The action may be small, the pattern is deep. When the mind feels empty space approaching, it reaches for contact. Not always because contact is needed, but because emptiness feels like exposure. In that exposed place, questions can rise that activity keeps buried. Am I truly happy? Why am I still angry? What am I afraid to feel? Who am I when nobody needs me, praises me, distracts me, or gives me a role to perform? These questions may not arrive as clear sentences. Often they arrive as restlessness, a tight chest, a strange sadness, a desire to stand up and do anything. The person may not think, "I am afraid of myself." They may only think, "This silence feels wrong," so they break it. The television comes on. The phone lights up. A song fills the room. Relief arrives, but it may be a thin relief because the mind has not been understood. It has only been covered again. This is where the ancient and modern views begin to meet in a powerful way. Psychology can describe how attention moves, how memory and imagination arise, how the brain turns inward when outside tasks disappear. Buddhism can describe how the mind clings, resists, and creates suffering around the self. Different languages, different worlds, but they point toward a similar human experience. When nothing outside demands us, something inside begins to speak. The question is whether we can listen without being swallowed by it. For many people, the first reaction is resistance. A thought appears and the person believes it. A fear appears and the body tightens around it. A memory appears and the old identity returns. Instead of seeing thought as thought, the mind treats each movement as a command. This is one reason silence hurts. It places us close to thoughts we have not learned to observe. Imagine sitting beside a river at night. In the dark, the moving water sounds larger than it is. You cannot see its edges clearly, so the mind begins to imagine depth, danger, and force. But when dawn comes, the river is still moving, yet it becomes easier to understand. You can see the current, you can see the banks, you can see that not every sound means threat. Quiet attention can work like that dawn. It does not stop the river immediately. It helps us see what is moving. This is very different from forcing the mind to be blank. Many people quit silence because they think thoughts mean they are doing it wrong. They sit for 1 minute, see the storm inside, and decide they are not made for stillness. But in many contemplative traditions, seeing the storm is not failure. It is the beginning of practice. The mind was already storming. Silence only made the weather visible. A person may discover that their thoughts are not as solid as they felt. A fear rises, stays for a while, and changes. A memory appears, burns with emotion, then fades into another image. A desire seems urgent, then loses strength when it is not immediately obeyed. This can be surprising because the mind often presents each thought as permanent and important. Silence slowly shows another possibility. Thoughts move. Feelings move. The self we defend so fiercely also moves. At first, this can feel unstable. If everything inside is changing, what can be trusted? If the mind is always telling stories, which story is true? If desire keeps creating new forms of dissatisfaction, where does rest begin? These are not small questions. They are the edge of the spiritual investigation. Buddhism does not ask a person to hate the mind. Zen does not ask a person to become cold or empty in a lifeless way. The point is more subtle and more difficult. The person begins to see that being ruled by every passing thought is a kind of captivity. One anxious thought can change the body. One memory can darken the day. One desire can pull the heart away from the present moment. Silence reveals the strings. At first, we may feel trapped because we finally notice how many strings there are. Yet noticing is not the same as being trapped forever. A person who does not see the strings cannot loosen them. A person who sees them may suffer at first, but they also gain the first hint of freedom. This is why silence is so misunderstood. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. A person sits in a room, a monk sits in a hall. Someone stands alone under a tree while wind moves through the leaves. No dramatic event appears. No voice descends from the sky. No sudden answer fills the air. Inside, however, the deepest habits of the mind may be revealing themselves. The hunger to escape, the fear of being nobody, the need to control what cannot be controlled, the endless reach towards something more. In this way, silence is not empty at all. It is full of evidence. It shows the mind's relationship with time, memory, desire, fear, and self. It shows how much of life is spent leaning away from the present moment, trying to repair the past or secure the future. A quiet room becomes a laboratory. The breath becomes a small anchor. The mind becomes both the mystery and the field of study. This does not mean everyone should force themselves into long silence without care. For some people, especially those carrying deep trauma or intense distress, silence may need to be approached gently, with support, and with wisdom. Serious spiritual practice has never meant violence against the heart. Stillness is not a punishment. It is not a test of toughness. The path begins with honesty. A few quiet breaths can reveal more than an hour of noise. By now, the person in the dark room may understand something important. The discomfort did not come only from the lack of sound. It came from the mind meeting space and not knowing how to rest there. It came from thoughts becoming visible. It came from the self, no longer entertained, beginning to search for something to become. Outside, the rain softens. Inside, the mind keeps moving. But now the movement is not just chaos. It is a clue. If the mind hates empty space, perhaps empty space is exactly where its deepest habits can finally be seen. And once they are seen, another question appears, quieter than the first, but even more powerful. What happens to the brain, the attention, and the heart when a person stops running from that space? The mind has been seen moving in the dark, not because silence created the movement, but because silence took away the cover. The phone is still face down. The room is still quiet. Rain still slides along the window. Yet inside, attention begins to notice the strange machinery of thought, memory, fear, and desire. This is where modern science enters the story carefully. Not to steal the mystery from silence, to make the mystery more honest. For a long time, people spoke about silence through poetry, religion, and personal experience. A quiet forest felt different from a noisy street. A meditation hall felt different from a crowded train. A person who sat alone for a while often felt something shift, but it was hard to explain what changed. Now researchers can look at the brain while people rest, focus, meditate, or let the mind wander. And what they find does not make silence less strange. It makes it stranger. When the brain is not busy with a clear outside task, it does not simply shut down. It does not become a blank, dark room. In many moments of rest, the brain turns toward memory, imagination, self-reflection, and thoughts about other people. Scientists often connect this with the default mode network, a set of brain areas that becomes involved when the mind drifts inward. The name sounds cold. The experience is deeply human. It is the mind in the shower, replaying a conversation. It is the mind in bed, building tomorrow before tomorrow exists. It is the mind looking out of a car window, suddenly remembering a childhood room, a lost friend, or a choice that still feels unfinished. The brain at rest is not always resting. Sometimes it is telling stories. This helps explain why silence can feel so full. When the outer world grows still, attention may notice the inner world more clearly. The brain may begin moving through the self, through time, through fear, through memory. A person may think they are doing nothing, but inside, the mind is measuring life. Where have I been? Where am I going? Who am I becoming? What did I lose? What might still go wrong? Silence becomes uncomfortable when these questions appear without warning. The person wanted peace, but the brain opened a private archive. Old images rise like dust in a beam of light. Some are harmless, some are tender. Others are sharp enough to change the breath. This does not mean silence is dangerous. It means silence gives fewer places to hide. Meditation research adds another layer. Studies suggest that mindfulness practice may change how people relate to thoughts, attention, and emotion. That wording matters. It does not mean meditation magically turns off the mind. It does not mean every person who sits quietly becomes calm. It does not mean silence cures pain, illness, trauma, or anxiety. A responsible view is quieter than that. Mindfulness may help some people notice thoughts without being fully carried away by them. That is already powerful. A thought can appear like a hand grabbing the chest. I am failing. I am unsafe. I am alone. I must fix everything now. Most people do not experience these as passing mental events. They feel like truth. The body reacts. The heart speeds up. The face tightens. The day changes. But through careful attention, a small gap may open. The thought is still there. The person sees it differently. That gap is not dramatic from the outside. Nobody watching from across the room would see fireworks. A person is simply sitting, breathing, feeling the weight of their hands on their knees. Yet inside, something important may be changing. A thought that once controlled the whole body becomes something observed, not rejected, not obeyed. Observed. This is one of the quiet discoveries at the center of meditation. Freedom may not begin by removing every difficult thought. It may begin when a person stops mistaking every thought for a command. That idea sounds simple until someone tries it. Sit in silence, and the mind offers 1,000 invitations. Follow this memory, fear this future, judge this body, rewrite this conversation, prove your worth, become someone better before you can rest. The old habit is to follow immediately because thought feels urgent. Quiet attention interrupts the chase, just enough to ask, what is this? A worry becomes a worry, a memory becomes a memory, a fear becomes a sensation, a story, a movement in the body. The person is no longer completely trapped inside the first version of the thought. Some meditation studies have found differences in activity and connection in parts of the brain linked with self-related thinking and mind wandering. But this should not be turned into a cheap promise. The brain is complex. Meditation practices vary. People vary. A quiet beginner, a trained monk, and a person sitting unwillingly in silence are not having the same experience. The truth is more careful. Training attention may change the relationship between awareness and mental activity. That is enough. Because the terrifying part of silence is often not the thoughts themselves. It is the way thoughts become a world. One memory appears, and suddenly the body feels like it is living there again. One fear appears, and the future seems already ruined. One desire appears, and the present moment feels incomplete. Attention is the doorway. Where attention goes, the person's world begins to form. This is why silence is not just empty time. It can become a kind of mirror for attention. In noise, attention is constantly pulled from the outside. In silence, attention begins to show its habits. It leans toward pain. It reaches for pleasure. It creates stories around the self. It tries to escape discomfort before understanding it. A person may discover that their mind is not one steady voice. It is more like a crowded station at night. Trains arriving from the past, trains leaving toward the future. Announcements, warnings, regrets, wishes, faces, fragments. Silence does not stop the station at first. It lets the person hear how busy it has been. There is another famous study, often mentioned in conversations about silence. In an animal study with mice, researchers found that a period of silence was associated with changes in the hippocampus, a brain area linked with memory and learning. Some people later turn this into dramatic claims, as if silence automatically grows new brain cells in humans. That is not what should be said. The study was done in mice. It does not prove that sitting in silence creates new brain cells in people. Still, it raises an interesting question. If noise affects the nervous system, and if quiet changes the environment in which the brain operates, then silence may not be nothing. The absence of sound may still be an experience the body responds to. A quiet place is not an empty place. The nervous system notices. Anyone who has stepped from a loud street into a silent church, library, forest, or temple can feel this before they can explain it. Shoulders lower, breathing changes. The ears begin searching more gently. Small sounds become alive. A footstep, a bird, wind moving through leaves, cloth shifting against skin. The world has not vanished. It has become more detailed. This is one reason silence can become healing for some people, though not as a medical cure and not as a simple solution for everyone. It may give the mind fewer objects to chase. It may give the body fewer alarms to process. It may allow attention to return from the outer storm and notice what is actually happening inside. But again, the first return may not feel peaceful. A nervous system used to constant noise can find quiet almost suspicious. The body may ask, "Why is nothing happening? What should I prepare for? What am I supposed to do with this space?" The answer is not always immediate. Sometimes silence must be learned, like darkness. At first, a dark room seems empty or frightening. Then the eyes adjust. The window becomes visible. The chair takes shape. The outline of the door appears. Nothing magical has happened. The room was always there. The eyes needed time. Attention also needs time. A person who sits for only a few seconds may meet only the first wave of discomfort, restlessness, impatience, the need to check something, the belief that this is pointless. But if the person stays gently, without forcing, another layer can appear. Beneath restlessness, there may be sadness. Beneath sadness, fear. Beneath fear, tenderness. A hard surface begins to open. This is where science and ancient practice meet in a humble way. Science can describe attention, emotion, brain networks, stress, and the wandering mind. Spiritual traditions can describe suffering, craving, self and liberation through direct observation. Neither needs to pretend to replace the other. Together, they point toward a simple and unsettling truth. The mind is shaped by what it repeatedly does. If it repeatedly runs from discomfort, it becomes skilled at running. If it repeatedly chases stimulation, stillness begins to feel unsafe. If it repeatedly observes experience with patience, a different capacity may grow, not perfection. Capacity. The capacity to feel without immediately escaping. The capacity to notice a thought before becoming it. The capacity to let a moment be incomplete without rushing to cover it. This is why silence can change a life without making any grand promise. It does not have to perform a miracle. It only has to reveal the place where the person has never stayed long enough to understand themselves. A quiet breath, a thought rising, a feeling tightening, a choice not to run immediately. That choice may seem small, but it touches something ancient. Human beings have always suffered not only from what happens, but from what the mind does with what happens. A sound disappears, but the mind keeps echoing it. A loss happens once, but memory reopens it many times. A fear has no object in the room, yet the body prepares as if danger has arrived. Silence brings these patterns closer. Then attention can begin to study them, not with cold analysis, with steady presence. This is why the old image of silence as emptiness is incomplete. Silence is not a blank wall. It is more like clear water. At first, we may dislike what we see in it: the restless face, the tired eyes, the shadow of grief under the surface. But as the water settles, another possibility appears. Seeing clearly is different from drowning. The person in the quiet room may still feel the old thoughts moving. The brain may still wander. The heart may still tighten around certain memories. Nothing has been magically erased. Yet something subtle has changed. The person is beginning to understand that the mind can be observed. And what can be observed may not be the whole of who we are. This is the doorway that ancient monks entered long before machines could measure brain activity. They did not need the language of networks and scans to know that silence revealed the mind. They sat down, breathed, watched, suffered, softened, and watched again. The question now becomes older than science. If quiet attention can reveal the mind's habits, why did spiritual traditions choose to enter that silence on purpose? Why would anyone walk willingly into the very place where the self begins to tremble? Long before a brain scanner could show patterns of attention, long before modern life filled every empty hour with sound, people were already walking into silence on purpose, not because silence was easy, because it was honest. A monk sitting before dawn in a quiet hall was not trying to escape the world in the way many people imagine. He was not running away from life, emotion, pain, or responsibility. In many Buddhist and Zen traditions, silence was a way of turning toward life more directly, without the usual fog of distraction. The room may have been simple: a wooden floor, a wall, a cushion, breath moving in the body. Outside, wind touched bamboo, birds stirred in the dark, and the first light of morning reached the edge of the temple roof. Nothing dramatic seemed to be happening. Yet inside that still body, the old human battle was fully alive: desire, fear, mirror, restlessness, the need to be someone. This is where many people misunderstand spiritual silence. They think the monk enters silence because he has already defeated the mind. But often, the silence is where the mind is finally seen clearly enough to stop being obeyed blindly. That is a very different thing. In Zen, one of the central practices is called zazen, pronounced zazen. The word simply points to seated meditation. A person sits upright, breathing naturally, aware of the body, aware of the mind, aware of the moment as it appears. It sounds simple. That simplicity is what makes it so difficult, because when the body becomes still, the mind begins showing its habits with great force. A desire rises, an irritation appears, a memory returns, the knees ache, the back complains. A thought says, "This is pointless." Another thought says, "You are not doing it right." Then another thought says, "You should become peaceful soon." Because peaceful people are better than restless people. Even the desire to be calm can become another form of chasing. Zen practice does not begin by pretending this is not happening. It begins by seeing it. The person does not need to fight every thought as if each one were an enemy, nor does the person need to follow every thought as if it were wisdom. Something subtler is being learned. Sit, notice, return, again and again. The mind reaches for something, and awareness learns not to be pulled so quickly. This is not emptying the mind like pouring water from a bowl. That image can be misleading. The goal is not to become blank, cold, or lifeless. A blank mind is not the point. A stone can be blank. A sleeping person may be blank. But Zen is not trying to turn a human being into a stone. It is trying to reveal the difference between awareness and the restless movement of thought. A thought appears, but it does not have to become a prison. A feeling appears, but it does not have to become the whole world. A desire appears, but it does not have to command the body. That discovery is quiet, but it can change everything about the way a person lives. The ancient practitioners entered silence because ordinary life makes it hard to see the mind clearly. In the middle of work, family, danger, hunger, conflict, ambition, and pleasure, the mind has many excuses. It can blame the world for every movement inside itself. It can say, I am angry because of that person. I am restless because of this place. I am unhappy because I do not yet have what I need. Silence removes many of those excuses, not all of them, enough to reveal the pattern. A person sits alone, with nothing to win and nothing to perform, and still the mind wants more. More comfort, more certainty, more recognition, more control, more proof that the self is safe, important, and permanent. This is why silence can feel like a spiritual test, though not in a harsh or punishing way. It shows how much of the self is built from motion. The self remembers itself, defends itself, compares itself, improves itself, regrets itself, advertises itself, and fears losing itself. Then, in silence, a strange question appears. Who is this self that must be protected every moment? At first, that question can feel too abstract, but in practice, it is very close to ordinary life. Someone criticizes us, and the body tightens. Someone ignores us, and the heart sinks. Someone praises us, and the mood rises. A plan fails, and the mind says, I am failing. A memory returns, and the old identity comes back with it. The self feels solid, yet when we look closely, it is always changing. This is where the Buddhist idea of emptiness must be handled with care. Emptiness does not mean nothing exists. It does not mean your life is meaningless. It does not mean the world is fake, or that love is an illusion, or that pain does not matter. Emptiness means that things do not exist as fixed, separate, permanent objects in the way the mind imagines. A person is not one frozen thing. A feeling is not one frozen thing. A thought is not one frozen thing. Even the self, the thing we defend most fiercely, is made of changing parts. Body, memory, feeling, habit, culture, language, fear, hope, relationship, and attention. Remove one part, and the sense of self shifts. Add one experience, and the story changes. Time passes, and the person who once felt so certain becomes difficult to find. Silence helps reveal this because silence slows the usual performance. Without an audience, The self has fewer costumes without noise. Its movements become easier to notice. Without constant stimulation, the person may begin to see that the one who says, "I must have this, I cannot bear that, I will never be whole unless this happens," is not always telling the truth. That can feel frightening. It can also feel like the beginning of freedom. Buddhist practice often studies suffering at this level. Not only the obvious suffering of loss, sickness, age, and death, but the smaller unease woven through ordinary wanting. The wish for the moment to be different. The hunger for praise to last. The fear that pleasure will fade. The anger that life does not obey the private plan inside the mind. The word dukkha, pronounced dukkha, points toward this deep unease. It is not only pain. It is the stress of clinging to what cannot stay. A quiet meditation hall becomes a place where this stress can be seen in real time. The person wants the legs to stop hurting, wants the bell to ring, wants the mind to become peaceful, wants an experience of wisdom, wants to be the kind of person who does not want so much. Even wanting to stop wanting becomes another desire. This is why spiritual silence can be so precise. It does not let the mind hide behind beautiful ideas. A person may believe they want enlightenment, peace, compassion, or truth, but in silence, they may discover that what they really want at first is relief from discomfort. That discovery is not a reason for shame. It is a doorway. Because once the mind sees its own hunger clearly, something softens. The person no longer has to pretend that every desire is noble, every fear is reasonable, every thought is true. There can be honesty without hatred. Awareness can look at the restless mind the way a clear pond receives falling leaves. The leaves fall. The water does not chase them. This is one of the quiet powers of Zazen. The practice teaches through direct contact, not through belief alone. A person can read many words about peace and still be ruled by anger. They can admire spiritual wisdom and still be trapped by the next insult. They can speak about letting go while gripping tightly to an image of who they must become. Sitting in silence makes the contradiction visible. The body knows before the philosophy is complete. Hands rest on the knees. Breath enters. Breath leaves. A thought rises and vanishes. Another thought rises and vanishes. The face softens, then tightens again. The mind wanders. Awareness returns. No great drama, no final victory. Only the slow training of not being captured so completely. This is why monks entered silence again and again, not for one perfect moment. For a different relationship with all moments, silence also reveals compassion in a surprising way. At first, a person may enter silence and see only their own pain. But over time, the same restlessness seen inside oneself begins to appear everywhere. Other people are also chasing peace. Other people are also afraid of losing love, status, health, time, and control. Other people are also carrying hidden memories, private grief, and minds that do not easily rest. The boundary softens. Judgment becomes less simple. A stranger in traffic, an impatient voice, a lonely face in a waiting room. A person pretending to be fine while their eyes say otherwise. Silence can make these things more visible because it teaches us to recognize the movement of suffering from the inside. This does not make a person weak. It can make them less cruel. To see the mind clearly is to understand that most people are not only acting from choice, they are also acting from fear, habit, hunger, confusion, and old pain. That does not erase responsibility, but it changes the heart that responds. A silent mind is not a dead mind. It may become a more intimate mind, a mind that can notice without grabbing, a mind that can feel without collapsing, a mind that can meet the world without turning every moment into a mirror of personal desire. Still, none of this removes the terror completely at the beginning. In fact, the deeper the silence goes, the more it may reveal. A person may discover grief they thought was gone. They may feel loneliness that constant activity kept hidden. They may see how much of their identity was built from being useful, admired, needed, busy, or right. When those roles fall quiet, the self may tremble. This trembling is not a sign that silence has failed. It may be the self losing its usual hiding places. And this is where the mystery becomes most human. The thing that feels terrifying in silence is often the same thing that keeps a person trapped outside of silence. The fear of being nobody, the fear of not being enough, the fear that without movement, achievement, noise, or approval, there may be nothing solid underneath. Zen does not rush to cover that fear with easy comfort. It invites the person to sit close enough to see whether the fear is telling the whole truth. A candle burns in a quiet room. The flame moves slightly when the air changes. Shadows breathe against the wall. The person sitting there may still feel thoughts moving, but now those thoughts are not the only reality. There is also breath, body, space, awareness. The strange dignity of not running. For a moment, the silence is no longer only painful, it is alive, not because it gives the person a new identity, but because it loosens the old one. And that leads to the final question of the journey. If silence reveals the self, and the self is less fixed than we believed, then maybe the terror of silence is not the end of the path. Maybe it is the doorway. Maybe what first feels like emptiness is not punishment. Maybe it is a gift so deep that the mind fears it before it understands it. The silence that once felt like a threat has now become something harder to name. The room is still quiet. The phone is still dark. The rain has softened against the window, and the small lamp beside the bed throws a warm circle of light across the floor. Nothing dramatic has happened from the outside. No great voice has entered the room. No sudden answer has appeared. Yet the person sitting there is no longer meeting silence in the same way. At the beginning, quiet felt like emptiness. Then it became crowded. Thoughts rose from the dark like figures stepping into a hallway. Memories returned. Fear moved through the chest. The mind reached for noise because noise had always been the easiest escape. Now something more difficult is being understood. Silence was never the enemy. Silence was the place where escape stopped working. This is why silence can feel terrifying at first. It removes the covers from the hidden life of the mind. It shows the fear we hide under productivity, the loneliness we cover with entertainment, the grief we soften with constant motion, and the hunger for approval that can live quietly beneath even our most ordinary choices. A person may think they are afraid of silence, but often They are afraid of what silence allows them to feel. The old sadness that never fully left. The regret that returns when the room becomes still. The strange exhaustion of pretending to be fine, the need to become someone else before being allowed to rest. Modern life offers many ways to avoid this meeting. A person can stay busy for years. They can keep every hour full, every room filled with sound, every moment covered with a screen. They can move from work to entertainment to sleep and back again, never noticing how much of life has become a careful escape from one quiet question. What is still hurting when nothing is happening? That question does not arrive to punish the person. It arrives because something inside is asking to be seen. This is where silence becomes a gift, but not the kind of gift people usually want. It does not always arrive wrapped in comfort. It does not flatter the self or promise that peace will come quickly. Sometimes it begins with discomfort because it is returning the person to the part of life they have learned to avoid. A gift can still hurt when it removes an illusion. For many people, the illusion is that peace will come only when life is finally arranged correctly, when the right person stays, when the body feels safe, when the past is forgiven, when the future is certain, when enough money, success, love, or recognition has been gathered, when every loose end is tied and every fear has been answered. But silence suggests a deeper problem. The mind can turn anything into another condition for rest. Even when life becomes quieter outside, the mind may continue saying, "Not yet, not until this is solved, not until you are better, not until the future is safe, not until the self becomes someone worth accepting." In that way, the mind keeps moving the door farther away. Silence reveals the movement. A person sitting quietly may begin to notice that the chase is not only about the world, it is also inside attention itself. The mind leans forward. It tries to grab the next moment. It tries to repair the past from a chair in the present. It tries to build a self that cannot be criticized, abandoned, forgotten, or changed. No wonder silence hurts. It asks the mind to stop building for a moment. And when the building stops, the self feels exposed. This exposure can feel like weakness, but it may be the beginning of honesty. The person begins to see how much energy has been spent defending an image, how many words were spoken to protect pride, how many choices were shaped by fear, how many desires were not truly desires, but attempts to escape the ache of being incomplete. Such seeing can be painful. It can also be clean, not clean in the sense of perfect. Clean in the sense of no longer lying. A person does not have to pretend that restlessness is wisdom, or that craving is freedom, or that constant distraction is the same as happiness. In silence, the mind may finally admit that it has been tired for a long time. This is not defeat. It is contact with reality. Buddhist and Zen traditions often point toward this kind of seeing. The purpose is not to shame desire, fear, or sadness. These movements belong to human life. The deeper teaching is that suffering grows when the mind clings to them, becomes them, or uses them to build a fixed story about the self. A fear appears, and the mind says, "This is who I am." A wound appears, and the mind says, "This will never change." A desire appears, and the mind says, "I cannot be whole without it." Silence gives these claims space to be examined, not as a theory, as direct experience. A thought rises and falls, a feeling rises and falls, an urge rises and falls. Even a strong emotion, when watched with patience, changes shape. It may tighten, burn, tremble, soften, move, fade, return, and fade again. The person begins to see that inner life is powerful, but not as solid as it first appears. This discovery can be deeply relieving. The mind is not a prison made of stone, it is more like weather. Some weather is gentle, some is violent, some arrives from conditions we did not choose. Yet awareness can learn to stand beneath it. Without believing every storm is the whole sky, that is not a cure for every wound. It is not a magic answer. It is a quieter way of living with what moves through us. The terrifying gift of silence is that it shows the difference between pain and the story built around pain. A lonely feeling may be real, but the story that says, "I will always be alone," may not be. A memory may carry grief, but the story that says, "I am nothing but what happened," may not be true. A fear may need care, but the story that says, "I must run from this forever," may be the very thing keeping the fear alive. In the beginning, silence seemed to trap the person with the mind. Later, it reveals that the mind itself is moving. That movement matters, because what moves can be met. What can be met can be understood. What can be understood may begin to loosen. The person does not become free by destroying the mind. They become freer by no longer treating every passing thought as a master. They learn that a memory can visit without taking over the whole house. A fear can speak without choosing the path. A desire can burn without becoming the center of the universe. This is why silence can open compassion. When a person sees their own restless mind clearly, they begin to recognize the same restlessness in others. The impatient voice, the angry driver, the distant friend, the person who needs to be admired, the person who cannot stop talking, the person who fills every pause with noise. Beneath many behaviors, there is often a mind trying not to feel exposed. Everyone is looking for relief. Some look for it in control, some look for it in praise, some look for it in speed, noise, pleasure, certainty, or endless distraction. Silence does not make a person better than them. It may make a person less quick to judge, because once you have seen your own mind reaching for escape, you understand that suffering has many disguises. It can wear success. It can wear confidence. It can wear humor. It can wear spiritual language. It can even wear the desire to be peaceful. The old chase can hide anywhere. Silence brings it into the light. Near the end of this journey, the word terrifying begins to change. At first, it meant fear, the fear of being alone with thought, the fear of inner noise, the fear that beneath all activity there might be grief, emptiness, or a self too fragile to face. But another meaning slowly appears. Something can be terrifying because it is too honest, too vast, too close to the truth we have avoided. Silence is terrifying in that way. It strips away the performance, it removes the audience, it leaves the person with breath, body, memory, awareness, and the quiet fact of being alive. It asks for nothing, and because it asks for nothing, the mind has nowhere to bargain. The strange thing is that beyond this fear, silence may become tender. not immediately, not always. But sometimes, after the first wave pass, the room does not feel so hostile. The breath becomes less like something being watched and more like something carrying the person gently. The body, which seemed tense and foreign, becomes a place to return to. The quiet, which once felt like a wall, begins to feel like space. Nothing has been solved in the usual sense. The past is still the past. The future is still uncertain. The self is still unfinished. Yet the person is not running in the same way. That is the beginning of another kind of peace. Not the peace of having no thoughts. Not the peace of having no pain. Not the peace of controlling life so completely that nothing can touch the heart. That kind of peace is too fragile because life will always change. A deeper peace begins when the person can sit near the truth without immediately escaping. The truth of fear, the truth of longing, the truth of impermanence, the truth that no identity can remain fixed forever. The truth that every human being is softer, more frightened, and more changeable than they appear from the outside. In that softness, silence becomes less like punishment and more like a teacher. It does not speak in sentences. It teaches by removing. It removes the noise that made the wound invisible. It removes the speed that made the chase feel normal. It removes the performance that made the self feel solid. It removes, for a little while, the world that kept telling the mind what to become next. Then, beneath all that removal, something simple remains, a person sitting, a breath arriving, a breath leaving, a thought passing through awareness like a cloud crossing a dark sky. Maybe this is why ancient practitioners kept returning to silence. Not because it was always peaceful, but because it was true. Not because it erased suffering, but because it showed the roots of suffering. Not because it made the self stronger, but because it revealed that the self did not need to be defended in every moment. The room is quiet again. The phone remains untouched. Outside, the rain has almost stopped, and the window reflects a face that looks tired, human, and real. There is still fear in that face, still memory, still longing, still the old desire to reach for something and disappear into it. But now the person stays, not forever, only for this breath. Then the next, in the silence, nothing attacks, nothing applauds, nothing demands a performance. The hidden noise of the mind still moves, but it is no longer completely hidden. It has been seen, and once seen, it is not quite the same. The terrifying truth about silence is that it gives us back to ourselves. At first, that can feel like pain. Then, if we remain gently enough, it may begin to feel like freedom.